Hello, everyone. It's great to see all of you from all over the world. My name is Homa Shojai. I'm on the advisory board of Arts, Letters, and Numbers and associate curator of the Sunship exhibition. I also studied painting with our dear guest, an incredible artist, Ian Wu, at LaSalle College of the Arts in 2015. I want to welcome you all to Ian's talk today titled Shifting Planes on Abstraction, Counterpoint, and Drawing. Ian Wu is an artist working in the language of abstraction. He is influenced by forms of modernism, perceptual abstraction, and the sound structures of music improvisation. His work is characterized by a sense of gravitational and representational change. He often uses the term picture making when describing his position and approach, maintaining the discipline and evolvement of painting as a vehicle for pictorial reflectivity. He's had numerous exhibitions all over the world, and his works are in the collection of major institutions and museums. As a musician, Wu composes, performs, and records, and is part of the music ensemble Chien Pima. Forgive my translation. He lives and works in Singapore and is represented by Faust Gallery. For today's talk, he will speak for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then we will have some time for Q&A. Please type your questions in the chat or ask them after the talk. Thank you, Ian, for bringing this talk to our Sunship exhibition in the City X Venice as part of the 17th Venice Architecture Biennale. We're truly grateful for your participation. Ian Wu.
Thanks, Homa. Thank you, David. Yeah. And thank you, Arts, Letters, and Numbers for inviting me. Yeah. So if my voice is a bit soft, maybe you probably need to wave at me, Homa, but I think it's okay for now.
It's good. It's great.
Great. So I'm going to, and thanks, Duan as well for who's helping to set up the Zoom today. Yeah. And very happy to meet everyone who has come for my talk. I'm going to be doing pretty much about 45 minutes or maybe a bit less, it depends on how I'm able to sort of like think through my slides. And I'm going to share screen right now. And I'm going to just share the first slide, which is actually a sound piece. It's going to go on for about a minute or two, and then I'll start to show you the images. So welcome to my talk today, Shifting Planes. I just played you an excerpt from actually a recording from my iPhone. I usually have an amplifier and a bass guitar, and I have a looper besides my paintings in the studio. And once in a while, I'll take a break from making my work and sit at the amp and record passages. And the passage of music earlier on has a bass line that, or rather a bass note that changes. And I think I just wanted to start with that because of how that note changes. And whenever a note changes, it affects the entire harmony of the sound that was floating around it, the higher pitch tones that were floating around it. And originally, I wanted to actually title this talk Counterpoint. In fact, my file had this big text counterpoint for the whole month, when I was preparing the talk. And at some point, I changed it to Shifting Planes. And I will tell you the reason later as the slides review themselves. Yeah. So I guess I will just start the talk with an image here. A drawing, a pencil drawing. It's about, I'm just going to give you approximate sizes as I go along. This is probably about 30 centimeters. Yeah, it's a pencil drawing that I did a series of them in 1995. And it's called Sleep. And I literally was actually falling asleep while I was trying to mark out the doodles. And it's quite concentrated. It's a very centralized image. And I would just mark them, and I wouldn't be looking at them much until a certain point where I sensed that I had done enough. Or sometimes I would literally fall asleep and then I'll wake up again. So the thing is about how hard I press the pencil and how the paper is catching it. And without looking at, I'm kind of like imagining how the image would look like. Obviously, most of the time, it's not what I imagine, and I get a bit of a surprise when I actually see the actual paper when I decide that it's done. Yeah, and the image kind of like reminds me a bit of the idea of things that are. It's like air, it's something that is appearing, I guess for today, right this moment, as I'm talking to you, I will say appearing, but maybe tomorrow I might say disappearing. Okay. The reason why I was kind of interested in this nuanced way of experimenting with marking the pencil was I enjoyed looking at the artist Ingres, Dominic Ingres, especially his drawings. I chanced upon his drawings of portraits when I was studying in England, and I especially like the way when I look at his portraits. Actually, I'm not really looking at the subject matter. I'm actually looking at how the image is appearing before you, and at some point the clothes are almost fading off, and to me it's a way of him drawing and giving us a sense of the materiality from the texture of clothes, the pail that he's holding, which is metal, so the rendering is different each time. And then you can see the face, skin. And each time the marking changes, the degree of pressure changes and the hatching changes. And you get a sense of the a sense of touch, or maybe a sense of how a thing is. And especially when he goes from the skin to the eye, you see a major difference in terms of how he translates the opaqueness, or something that is transparent, or something that's translucent. So I really enjoyed looking at that. And perhaps the idea of me drawing that sleep image was one way of exercising my love for his drawings. I don't really have a lot of words for this talk, but I do have words. And I have put this categories, you know. I like to categorize things, and because I work in a very it can be a little bit chaotic sometimes when I work, and so by reflecting and putting things in relationship to color, putting things in relationship to the quality of line, it helps me to reflect in ways that similarities, you know, before I shift them and use them as a kind of element in my work. So I kind of like divide them between mind, structure, location, sound, space. And, you know, just to give you an idea that, you know, for example, a mind could be what I mentioned earlier on about categorizing things. Structure is a kind of thingness, you know. It could be also a kind of shape, you know. And then you have location as a kind of direction, you know, or non-direction. And then you have sound, which to me sometimes deals with the idea of points, yeah, stoppages, yeah. And then finally you have space, which is could be a kind of object like a window, door frames, air, tonality. So it kind of like shifts, you know, the way I sort of like interpret these words here. And then I have below it, you know, I have cropping, blocking, and revealing. So for this talk, I use these words to begin perhaps to have a conversation even to myself, you know, to look at these things and almost like have a kind of template for this particular talk. So if I get lost, I hopefully can come back to some of these things. So is the mind a way of cropping, you know? And the mind can attempt to block out things as well. Yeah. And in terms of revealing, I think as the slides go by, I would be giving you some examples about how the idea of an image that's being revealed, the idea of change and this idea of the image revealing is a very important part of my art practice. Here is a larger drawing, and of course, because it's larger, my body reacts differently. The paper is about 1.8 meters, so it's almost a little bit smaller than my body, but it's kind of close. So when you do a drawing like that, the body engages it differently. It's a bit more dynamic, you know, the tools that you're using get larger. And I titled it as Lot Sees Salt, you know, it's after one of the chapters in the Bible, you know, about this person who's trying to escape a particular city that was falling apart, you know, and everything was turning into salt. And he said that God told him not to turn his back to as he was leaving the city, otherwise he'll be turned to salt, him and his family. So here is an image of done with a very large brush. Yeah, and it was done quite quickly. And I think the idea of a lifespan in terms of responding and then traveling. As once I start to do a drawing, when the shape appears, there is a very quick reflex action of thinking, recognizing, not wanting to recognize, and then getting into the flow. I think the flow is it's kind of a mysterious term, because the flow is something where once you enter into the method of making, you know, or the discipline, you know, you kind of like don't think too much, you know, you are kind of like on autopilot, you know, and then at some point you start to think, and maybe you lose a bit of that. You may lose some things when you start to think, you know. So there's always this very careful moves that that I have to sort of like confront, and it can be revelatory or it can be frustrating. I wanted to share with you this idea of an image about thought. Yeah. So what is this idea of an image about thought, you know? I have two works here. On the left is called Jazz Rock Special 2010. It's a small drawing. It's almost size about 20 centimeter size. Actually, it's a torn piece of paper. So I have a lot of torn paper around sometimes, and I'll use it. I don't really like to waste things, so I will use them and I'll paint things on it, you know. And on my right, you have work from a long time ago, Dong Yuan, okay, the artist, and it's called Xiao and Xiang Rivers. It's actually a left-hand detail, close-up detail, and it is supposedly done with ink, but it is not with line, it is dotted. So whatever demarcations you see there are dotted, yeah, done with the brush and dotted. And if you look at my work on the left, I think there are some semblance of me working in a kind of similar manner, dotting and trying to find form. And I think the idea of thought is always something that is, I think there is a lot of texts, Rosalind Krauss, who wrote about formulas that one can refer to. And I do think about this idea of thought being formless, because you don't know where the lines end, you know. So a thought is a space that gets occupied. This is a drawing from 2014. Someone mentioned to me, oh, it's like a skull shape. I like to work kind of like a reverse manner, you know. It's just the way I think. I think recently I was writing a text for an exhibition, a printmaking exhibition. And I was talking about abstraction. And I had a line that I wrote, and it's abstraction begins with no memory, but ends with one. Abstraction begins with no memory, but ends with one. So, you know, I use this sentence as kind of like a mantra for me, because it's just the way I think. And I refer this back to actually quite a lot of abstract artists that actually start from nothing. And so when I say no memory, it's that kind of like nothing, you know, you start with nothing, and then you start to make the marks, and then representation or non happens, but there is a kind of form or structure that appears, and then you take it away from there, and at some point you finish the work, you know. So when I say it ends with one, it deals with the idea of completing a work. So this work, the first things that went on were the marks that went round like a circular fashion. So it's a kind of, to me, it's like a kind of signal, you know, and I'm doing this kind of mark going round. And at some point it slows down, and then this image appears, you know, and I always use, I mean, the title of it's called Tracker, and obviously it's like, I was back then I was thinking about this idea of a machine that's kind of tracking movements and everything, and although at some point I kind of like reach a kind of possible image of a kind of object, you know, and but the thing that really interests me is that it's kind of an odd object, you know, because if you think the skull is not really it's obviously not the exact shape, because it's got protrusions in it, you know, which I think is the most interesting thing about it. It's got 1, 2, 3. I don't know whether you can see it. I've got like, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4 here. So there are like 4 points, like a punctured space, angular moles. So to me, this if you look long enough, there are quite a few things that appear, you know. So there are like these 4 points here that appear that seem to be like creating a kind of arch, a movement, like a fan-like movement. And then you have you look at this this shape here, and then you compare it to this other thing that's happening below. There is a kind of mirroring, but the quality of how it's being done is different. Yeah. So the idea of that repeating something, but doing it differently and seeing what happens creates a kind of dynamic in the work. So here's another one from the same series. So if you look long enough, you will see these fissures here, which are very thin lines that accompany this image here. So it's almost like this object was thinking about this. Yeah. And so the idea of thought is almost like a kind of can objects be things that also think, you know? And obviously, as an artist, I can make that happen. Yeah, I can envision ideas about the material world thinking to itself in relationship to the atomic, then the subatomic, you know. So materials, and you break them down from macro to micro, you know. So they are, to me, it's almost like that kind of conversation. They're like going backwards and forwards. So yeah, so you will notice I'm talking about a lot of circular things. So this shape is something that I kind of made this year, and at a printmaking workshop at STPI in Singapore. And well, I wanted to paint and draw on an object, you know. And I just was thinking about this idea of an image without corners. Yeah. So I recently read, I've been reading about ink painting by an author, Francois Julien, and the title of the book is The Great Image Has No Form. And of course, he talks a lot about classical painting, but what was interesting is that it's pretty much an analysis about the presence of an image, which is something that I'm very interested in. And part of one of the passages of this book, there was something that he mentioned. He said something about the great image has no corners, you know. And I kind of like really connected to that. And it made me think about a lot of how we, in art, we kind of like frame things, like, so the object obviously is governed by its shape, it's three-dimensional. And this one, you move around the three-dimensional, it changes, the line changes. So I was kind of interested in how whatever I draw or paint on this object, you can, when you move around it, it starts to change. But at the same time, I wasn't interested in treating this like a picture. Yeah, I wasn't interested in treating this like a picture. I just didn't feel right for me to draw something as if it was a picture. But so I drew things around it as if these lines were things that are built inside the object. Yeah. And I think if at a glance at this object, you would think that maybe there is a constant line in here, a thick band here that actually goes around and touches, it meets, and it's like a ring that meets. And then you have some really random orange marks here. And they seem to be obviously a kind of positive part of, like a positive, they seem to be frontal, but actually when I was constructing it, they were the first things that went on. And then the yellow patch is actually the last thing that went on. So I like to sometimes confuse myself, as I'm constructing it, and at some point relook at it again and see what happens between what's front, back, or in between. Yeah. And so going back to the idea of an image without corners, so there is the eyes, the optical, and then there is us viewing in the real world. And I think the real world is really interesting. You need to focus on something, and then because the world is filled with so many distractions, and so in art, it's just a way to frame it and getting us to really concentrate. So I feel that these two extreme points are very important to be aware, and it's something that I always think about. In fact, sometimes I think the real world it can be quite ugly, yeah, depending on where you are, and sometimes art is almost like a kind of grace that happens, that you frame it, and one example is Turrell's images, Turrell's framing of the sky. That's a very good example. And drawing on the object was also me thinking about these cave paintings, right? They all have these lumps, right? So I always wondered how did they get this perspective? The perspectives are pretty good, we're looking at some of these cave paintings. And I was just fascinated at how they would draw on this really, really not flat surfaces, and get these images on it. So yeah, so that was one of the inspirations for making those round objects and drawing on them. So here is another one that is a little bit more punctured. It's a punctured sphere. So the lines, they seem to be more, and they are like dividing, That's because I was drawing on a shape that was a little bit more uneven. And then I had two things to deal with. I had a kind of like, if you see the front here, you have a kind of a mark impression that is kind of like done by my elbow or my knee. It was either one of them. And of course, it caused these cracks to happen. So there are like two things that I was dealing with here. And I was just wondering how the lines could have a dialogue with these marks that were made. So it was like the real and the illusionary coming together. I think there's a sense of I mean, when I look at this image, it looks like it reminds me of uncertainty and doubt, and I was just thinking about white spaces, are they really suggesting a kind of emptiness? And with this object, the thicker lines here, they actually don't, there's an attempt to get them to meet, but they actually don't exactly meet in the back of it. So more diagrams of dots this time, back to something a little bit more digital, coming from a kind of electronic device, drawing from an electronic device. And you can see that there are 5 dots here. And I showed this together with the earlier image just to give a sense of the difference in how texture, non-texture, something that's really graphic and something that's not, affects the way I think about image making and the idea of the line that is trying to create a kind of sign, so the blue line is navigating on top of each of these dots here. And there seems to be, I mean, there's shadow on it as well. So the background has many variations and intersections. So the intersections were something that I worked on first, you know, and before arriving at the image on top. So both are important, yeah. I did think about the idea of, you know, sometimes with these lines that intersect, you know, they do remind me of the skin, the cells of the skin, or the lines from the palms. So I don't know, is the 5 dots the fingers and my thumb, you know, pointing, you know, at 5 directions at the same time. So this is it's titled Things Things that cannot be seen or cannot be heard. Earlier on, I talked about the idea of looking at the real world and how the artist is always trying to search for a kind of essential image. And in this talk, a lot of the images that I'm showing are like one or two. So I guess in this talk, I'm also trying to communicate to an audience this idea of this essential image. You know? And these 2 images here are cutouts, you know, of things that I'm working on, and sometimes there are parts of a work that don't really work in the painting or drawing. I'll just cut them all out. I could cut them circular. I could cut them that's like half structural, angular, and half you know. So I can vary their shapes, you know. And sometimes I would cut them very quickly so that I'm not overthinking them. And I would paint on one side and then reverse the other side. And there are things that I do at the side when I'm making a larger painting or something that is on at a more constant pace. These are short spurts of things that happen in the studio. And I like to use them sometimes as kind of installation device when I'm doing a kind of drawing installation, to pair it with someone else's work, or to pair it with a different an object or a structure, you know. And the idea of this cropping, you know, with a line that's cut, it is drawing it as well, just as painting something on. So it's when you cut, it's almost like I open the door, you know. It's like I'm opening a door to reveal a different perspective. Yeah, when I'm cutting, I'm almost like revealing the door to another perspective. And when I paint on top of it, you know, again, it kind of reveals a different perspective as well. So it's always a kind of like juggling process when the perspectives are changing. So I think very often about the vertical and the horizontal. I think this is something that is all around us and is very much a part of our lives. So an artist mentioned about how the vertical is time and the horizontal is space. And a religious teacher referred to the vertical as spirit and the horizontal as rational thought. Yeah, and I use this, I've been thinking quite a bit about this, and obviously it's something that is, for me, is kind of a useful concept to have as a kind of reference. And I think about the vertical also as a kind of divider, you know, a divider of space. Yeah. And the horizontal is something that's always compressing and expanding. So this is a photograph. And since I'm talking about axis, the idea of vertical and horizontal, you know, I would take images and these things would be at the back of my mind and sometimes it would appear. And when I take images, I kind of forget about the subject matter. So this is actually a shadow of a chair, but I don't think about them as that, you know, I am almost ignoring it because I want to use the shape. I don't even want to think of them as shadows, you know, they could be like shadows dancing, you know, but I don't even want to even think about them as that. I refer to them as flat, like just shapes, and so that I can learn something different from this photograph. Yeah. So abstraction is drawing to recollect. Yeah. So I think memory is something that's been, or you talked a lot about in art making. But to me, memory is being activated when you are making a work, when you're doing a drawing or painting. And using negative shapes to locate representations of certain situations. So obviously this shape kind of like refers to the previous photograph, you know, but I'm not drawing the subject matter, so it doesn't really matter. It goes off to something else. So the arrangement and order in my own spontaneous way resets a new context within this picture. And what is this context? It has its own logic of a certain reason to exist. It has its own logic for its own kind of phenomena to exist. So that's the freedom of, to me as an artist, that you have, you know, when you're making art. You know, there's a kind of you can counteract the gravity at times, or use it for a certain purpose. So erosion. This is a photograph of erosion, and I just wanted to show this slide because I do think quite a bit about the idea of John Cage, what he said about how to imitate nature in a manner of operation. Yeah, I'm not sure whether I do that. Actually, I'm a bit of a control freak, you know, and I know that I can allow it, like I'm when I pour paint in a horizontal manner, I have to do something else to it. Yeah, to sort of like not allow it to be too suspended, you know. So I guess it's my own desire to shift, you know, or my own desire to sort of question what nature is about. Yeah, because I think the artificial things are also very interesting, things that are constructed you know, like machines are also very beautiful things, you know. Yeah, so fleeting grids, you know, you see there are some markers here that allow me to uh, to to focus as a kind of uh, a, a, a structure for me to have a kind of very free reign in terms of marking and rubbing things. And at some point, there will be sufficient degree of this very softer image, you know, that's in relationship with the lines. One is, so the idea of the lines being something of the past and the darker image is something of the present. It's always, there's this shift that's happening in this image. I think as you can see, sometimes when I talk, I stumble into a situation where I'm caught in between things. I'm caught in between two situations. You know, this image of rabbit duck, I think some of you are very familiar with it, and I kind of encountered this image while reading about reading Ludwig Wittgenstein, which was philosophical investigations there. I kind of like the way he sort of like created these sentences, you know, of how to map a sentence from beginning, middle to end. You know, there are different ways of doing it. And I see this image as of the duck rabbit, the idea of ambiguity, and how Wittgenstein would construct sentences as possible pathways to communicate, to tell you, you know, from one point to another. You know, I find this to me something that is important. You know, why is it important? Because it deals with this idea of keeping something present before you, keeping something that is present before you, and allowing you to see a couple of possibilities. This is when I was, why did I think of shifting planes? You know, so I was standing on the 13th floor of my rented apartment. I stay in the east in Singapore, so it's quite close to the beach area. And this is actually downstairs as I'm looking down. And this structure here is actually my apartment is going to be torn down next year. So I think this is actually a makeshift enclosure that is to market the sale of a new apartment that they're going to build on top of my apartment. Yeah. So I was just gazing at this this structure below, and I was just thinking of how I could, the idea of perspective changing. You know, the almost the ground, me either going further down to the ground, or either the horizon that I'm seeing above this image is rising above me or coming down. You know, so there's a lot of these things that were like changing as I was looking at this image. You know, and at the same time, I was also doing some monotype in the print workshop, and so there were like certain shapes that were appearing that were pretty much to me a kind of negative of sometimes some of the things that I was seeing in the real world. Yeah, and this is actually a close-up of the previous enclosure here, the door. Yeah, and once it gets close up, it totally flattens the whole thing. I see as kind of flattened image, you know, and the idea of perspective is gone. You know, I see space instead. You know, so I really enjoy this kind of game that I'm playing. So here is another work with a monotype and wiping, shifting shapes, where the idea of things flipping between matter and void is really important for me. Yeah, and this is done again very quickly, within like a day. You know, the movements are done. There's some thinking involved. It's like shooting a target. You know, you just aim at something and you just go for it. And at some point, as you're doing it, your eyes are also looking and trying to stay alert. And here is a painting, a larger painting about 2 meters, 2.3 meters. Can you hear us? This is 2015. I was actually making this painting from an experience of Skyping someone and having difficulties hearing them. And I was pretty much also very influenced by Pierre Bonnard's The Breakfast Room in 1930. So you can see some references to the idea of the window and the door here. A kind of premonition about the sea. This is about 2 meters. This is called 25, 2015. You see the idea of cropping. This is a painting. And this is 25 stories where there are apartments that are in Singapore, some of the point block. I used to walk 25 stories just to exercise, and I would see the sea changing, different views of the sea changing as I'm walking up and down. So this is called 25. And I was also influenced by that image that you saw. That work is actually kind of influenced by this movie called The Face of Another, right? It's a Japanese new wave film, 1966, by Hiroshi Teshigahara. It's about a person, an engineer that had an accident and his face was damaged, and he had to go for plastic surgery to restore it. And I think he met a very good surgeon that was able to give him a new face. Yeah, it's an incredible movie. What I really think is really amazing is the idea of mirrors, glass reflection that happens a lot in this movie. And as they are having meetings, there's always images of these hands that are floating around, and the idea of things appearing, from the sides, multiplying, Here is an image of a car park that I took 2 times of it, So the idea of the axis, the vertical and the horizontal. And, I made a series of paintings here, and obviously color and the idea of multiple things are happening. And, there's a car here, and, at some point I look at an image like that because the subject matter is kind of pretty clear, I sort of like manifest myself as if I was the driver that was driving up this really funky looking car park, and whether they actually, these things, how they appear in this kind of work, I don't know, actually. I don't know. But I think there's a kind of reference to the speed, idea of speed, and the idea of when something is suddenly cropped up, there's a kind of compression that happens. I don't have a title for this yet because I just recently made this work, and some of them I don't really have a title. This is called Crusty. Yeah. So this is about for 60 centimeters. This is a work that I'm kind of like contemplating whether it's complete. Yeah. I was thinking about the idea of, I kind of like miss the turbulence as traveling on the aircraft because I haven't been traveling for a long time. Yeah. A continuous presence. So early on, I talked about the idea of between situations, and the continuous presence obviously is something that is happening right now. And to me, looking at artwork, I always hope to have that experience where something is happening before you and it's not stopping. And again, this phrase, I like this phrase that is being that I'm using from Francois Julian's book. It's called "He paints them on their way, not in relation to the category of being or nothingness. The category of being or nothingness." So the category of being is a kind of presence, and or nothingness is kind of absence, but as a continuous process. I wanted to talk about this image because I was walking one morning just before 7 a.m. and the light was fantastic. But before I could I saw this shrub here, and it was beautiful, this blue light that appeared in the tropics before the sun fully rise, So before I could take the phone out, it was gone, So this is what I think about, sometimes when you making art is a bit like that, trying to catch this moment, And so I made some drawings that to me kind of like perhaps triggered some of this idea of this particular blue light that I was after. And they are quite small. They are like about 30 centimeters in height. And then I'm going to go through to show you some digital drawings that I've done on the iPhone. This is called Snap. I did this while waiting on the bus stop on public transport. So a kind of a traveling time environment, it's interesting to see how the device, carrying a device and mapping these things, how they affect the way I think about spaces, constellations and spaces. It's a kind of desire, I guess, a kind of desire to sort of like move. And I want to, again, it kind of like refers back to the idea of thinking. Yeah. So this structure, to me, was one of the earliest drawings that I did that had this very kind of like tilt-like angular shape. And I saw them as something that I was drawing that would arrive at a kind of object, because as you can see here, I drew this and it's not really so much about composition. It's almost like a diagram with one object on it, and then you have a kind of object that has a kind of enclosure where you have a kind of phenomena that's happening inside. And I made later on, after drawing those, I decided to, it's sort of like when I decided to make these objects. So sometimes drawing allows me to see some things into the future that I'm not sure about, And these objects, obviously, I use some ideas of picture making in it, but they are really not about pictures. They are really about elements in a space. And they are built with different thickness. And of course, I have to do diagrammatic drawings to work with a contractor. And at some point, I would sometimes use like the archer, it's actually freehand. I would draw it by freehand, and I will ask the contractor to cut exactly the way I would draw it, so that the trace of my hand is kept in the objects. This is like a window and a curtain, So degrees of representation sometimes become very evident, A 5-point structure. It's very uncomfortable. I started with this 2 lines here, and then there is, I suddenly wanted to extend this, and I realized that, oh, it looks a bit awkward. I can't get the balance, and I kind of like that sometimes, because I'm sort of like I give myself a problem, and I have to try to resolve it. And if you see this image behind, it's almost like an image of a sun that never resolves itself. So the left side, it's almost like turning into a kind of morphing into a kind of skylight. So this series is called Resonance, Orientations, and Cycles. I'm going back to the earlier drawing that I talked about, sleep. And this, I did this dry point this year, and they were done without me, with me drawing on these like plastic mylar sheets, But I actually really can't see what I'm drawing because it's transparent. So it kind of like reminded me about this idea of me sensing more than seeing and knowing what I'm drawing. So I'm kind of like sensing what I want in the work. And these are, earlier on when I talked about the idea of the words that I was using from mind to structure to sound to space. So in a sense, this talk is also me trying to shift with the guideline of those words, that I was using. So I kind of like, I'm pretty much going to end my talk soon with ideas about space, And here you have a suggestion of two spaces interacting. So the surface is almost like a kind of, it's quite skin-like, it's kind of translucent, and you have a kind of energy that is being lighted up, And the lines that are going across it, each time it stops, it makes a turn, it stops, it makes a turn, they're like points, almost like a kind of stoppage. And this stoppage can be considered as also a kind of sound that's being spoken or a sound that is being uttered. So finally, I will end with soft elbow. Soft elbow is, again, back to the idea of drawing and painting an object. The object on your left, it's about 2 meters here. And then the object on your right is a smaller object, about maybe about 30 centimeters. So soft elbow is an image that I saw when I moved into this apartment. And it was a vision that I had of an elbow, which was the size of the corner of my room. And the elbow was melting. Yeah. So yeah, you can talk about surrealism, things like that, and I kind of like use that as a kind of starting point, when I was trying to make some objects, in this printmaking space that I was having a residency in. And I use ideas about painting, and the ideas of the vertical and horizontal is obviously something that is close to these works. But at the same time, corners, where I'm suggesting a larger event that's going to happen, at the corner of these. So each time I mark out a certain a marker of space, they are either suggesting a division of time, or they are trying to suggest a larger space somewhere else. For example, the left-hand side, this blue line, they could suggest a blue space. So here you see the installation, the blue line is flipped to the right-hand side. And these objects serve as a kind of markers in a space to allow the viewer to imagine and continue with the line that is suggested in each of these objects. And if I tilt them, then it's sort of like would counteract with the pillars, the architecture space. Yeah, so these are some devices that I sometimes would carry over from my drawing into objects, and the objects would be used as elements in the space. And in that sense, I see the space as a kind of picture, the whole real space as a kind of picture. So I want to end my talk today with this quotation. Again, going back to the idea of the continuous presence, the idea of suggesting and then allowing the viewer to take pleasure in thinking what is not there, thinking and then finally seeing what's not there. So of the pagodas whose rooftops vanish into the sky, one need not have the rooms at the base appear. It's as if there were not, either high or low. And I think instead of talking about absence and presence and flipping between each other, I will stay with the presence, idea of presence. Yeah. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time and attention. Thank you. So Homa, should I stop share or should I just leave the images on?
Sure. I think you have to stop share. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What a gift.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, Ian, that was amazing. And I have so many questions.
I'm sorry, I kind of like went like, I think I realized it's one hour, 22 minutes.
That's okay. It was perfect.
Ah,
Really wonderful. And you know, I mean, you raise it's like you raise so many issues that I think that instead of a lecture, we could have a TV series where we could move from one subject to another. You know, I don't know if I'm trying to form the question because I think that in this shifting planes or this vanishing and appearing, the continuous presence that's in your work and even absence becomes part of that presence. You know, it just offers, there's so much complexity in there. And then when you speak about the essential image or presence of an image, it suggests something much more permanent or maybe recognizable. Of course, right now we are speaking about things, so there is like assumptions of what a phrase hold in it, you know. So I was like trying to look for so I could like feel the essence in the paintings that you were showing. But as I was trying to find the essential image or the presence of an image, then I would remember that you spoke about the great image has no corners. And then I would be like, okay, you know. Anyway, so I don't know if like in architecture, we speak about it in terms of like weak form versus strong form or something like that. And I just, if any of the things that I said make sense to you, I appreciate to hear your response.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. I think the essential image is very different from, of course, every artist. Yeah, and I threw this term there because I feel that I think we all search for that, you know, and in each new work, of course, it's different. And the idea of the essential doesn't have to be beautiful, you know. It doesn't have to be ugly. It doesn't have to be weak, but it could be, you know. And it really depends on what we want to emphasize. You know, a weak drawing can be emphasized as something really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but yeah, you know, I'm just using the term weak. I mean, it doesn't mean it is meaningless unless I can see the image that is being made. What is the quality of in a sense that it's trying to celebrate weakness. I'm using that term weakness because you use that as
Yeah.
So, you know, going back to the idea of the essential image, you know, I actually, it's actually a frustrating thing for me as I'm making my work, but I guess that frustration is also important to my practice because I once gave a talk, and after the end of the talk, someone mentioned that, hey, you know, I can't remember the image of your works. You know, I can never recollect it, you know. And I said, I mean, that's it, you know, that's what I was so happy to hear it. I mean, one could see that as almost like a kind of negative thing, you know, it's like, it's not, may not be a compliment, but I actually saw it as a compliment. Okay, so whatever that person meant, you know, I saw it as a compliment because I'm kind of like interested in the idea of something that is you're trying to catch, but you kind of like not able to do it. And the not able to do it becomes the search.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If it's okay, I'd like to share something that I learned. Because I feel like I learned something today that maybe was close to things I knew before, but now I know it in a different way. And I'm really thankful for that. And I want to try to get at what it is through what you said. I'll start with where you started, which was sleeping and waking. I love that you started with falling asleep, drawing, and the waving in and out of the consciousness and the pressure of the mark, having you know, it's almost like humidity, you know, the humidity of drawing, the humidity in the atmosphere. But what the way you described it so beautifully, there's a great piece called Sleeping and Waking. I think it's by F. Scott Fitzgerald. It mingled the pressurization of consciousness, of coming in and out, with the pressurization of the marks of drawing. And then, of course, a lot of thinking about all of the relational interactions, right? The mark that is a mark, but that is more than itself, right? It is, and then it's also of, right? You can recognize, and you played with that a lot. I mean, you know, but I kept holding on to the sleeping and waking. And, you know, the recognizing and remembering and recording and representation. And then you said thought is a space that gets occupied, right? So now we're inhabiting our thought as we're sleeping and waking and making marks. And then that very powerful abstraction begins with no memory, but ends with one. I mean, wow, right? So the spark of memory, right? Memory like a fire, right? Memory emerges from the sparks of abstraction. And then when you started, things started to shift for me. Things, what I'm trying to get at, started falling in place when you started showing the stones that you were painting. And of course, you then developed that, you know, tracing, and then eventually at the end, where the whole space is a picture, right? The room you showed at the end, right? Which is a development of painting upon the world, right? Painting upon the stone. Eventually the world becomes a painting, it inverts. And that's when something really powerful dawned on me. And I have to share with you, all of a sudden this quote from Leonard Cohen, the great musician, came to mind, where he says, things are gonna slide in all directions. There won't be nothing you can measure anymore. The blizzard of the world has crossed the threshold and overturned the order of the soul. And I had a flash, mostly when you were in this, between sleeping and waking and pressure and the stones and the pushing back out of the world. And I was like, that's why we need painters. Now, I mean this. Now, what I'm trying to get at is, you know, you're a painter, and thank God we have you. What I'm trying to say is fairly specific. You need to paint. I mean, that's why you're a painter, right? So you need to do your work. That's how you live. Like a musician makes music and a writer. But what I realized is that the world needs painters, because we need those paintings in the world so that we can recognize ourselves in the world. See, the recognition piece, meaning the gift is that it's like the horse showed in the cave, right? Where's the horse? The horse emerges between us and those marks. There's marks, there's us, we recognize the marks. So the horse isn't in the marks and it isn't in us, it's between us and the marks. And when I started understanding from your the nuances of the sleeping and waking all the way through, I said, wow, your gift is to capture the nuances of the human soul, right? The fragile flames, the fragile pressures, the sleeping and waking. But crucially, you then put them out in the world. You know, you meaning you populate the world with the paintings and the drawings so that we can find ourselves in the world, us mortals, right? We can find ourselves, and that's the counterposition to what Leonard Cohen said. You see, so something hit me really for the first time, that the painter, maybe it's for millennium, maybe it's for centuries, maybe it's is actually balancing the world. It's creating a way that, as you said at the very end, was one of the last things you said, that the whole wheel space becomes the picture. And that's how we can navigate. That's how we don't disappear into the blizzard of the soul overturned by nothing you can measure. We actually still recognize the human condition as part of this blizzard of representation that our world is becoming. We recognize that we're actually, it's like Moby Dick, it's like Pip, we're in the ocean of representation, but we're still here. And I realized that, and I have to thank you for that, because it really had to do with your work, and it had to do with the your thought, the subtlety of your thought, the slow, careful delivery of your thought. Let it wash over me.
Thanks, David. I want to say, you say something about making artworks and how we get to recognize something in the artwork, and we can find ourselves. And I think that this is a very rich thing that you said, because there are many kinds of artists, and there are many kinds of artists, and you make different kinds of work, and the work is almost like waiting for the audience. And there are many kinds of people, audience, that would, and the painting and the audience is like there's this match that happens, this counterpoint that happens. And to me, it's almost like, what is this thing that we recognize that will make us find ourselves? It is a kind of mirroring effect. You recognize something in a work of art that you can relate to in your own search. And that's where you can connect. And sometimes you may not like something, but 10 years later you may, because you didn't have that experience yet. So I remember seeing Philip Guston's work, the American painter Philip Guston's work. And I remember seeing it for the first time, and it had a lot of erasures on it. And it looked like he wasn't sure what he was doing. It looked like he was fumbling. He wasn't sure. He was drawing something, painting something, erasing it, drawing, painting on top of it again. And I was going like, this looks really not, this is not happening. This doesn't look, this doesn't have the kind of, it didn't inspire me at all, the work, but I really was disturbed by it, actually. Maybe I shouldn't even use the word inspire. I was totally disturbed by the problems in the work, the failure in the work. But it haunted me for a week. I couldn't sleep. And then I went back to look at it, the same work. And then I fell in love with his work after that. Because he dared to erase the beautiful, he dared to erase the confidence so that he could find something. And if he had to fail, he failed. And I think it's the same thing where, like Bob Dylan's voice, some people say he can't sing. But I think that's not the point. The point is to understand that the poetry, he gave you a different perspective, which goes back to the idea of Homer's idea of wheat, the weak line or the weak thing, the weak aesthetic. No, it's just a different position, and there are different kinds of people in this world. And you need someone that sings in that particular voice, with that kind of lyrics, with that kind of poetry, to reach out to 2%, 3%, 4%, and maybe later the world. Some don't even reach out. Some artists out there are doing great work, but they haven't reached out, So I think that's something that I learned from your response to what I was talking about. And I noticed that you are a very positive person, David. You use words like memory like fire. I mean, that alchemy is confident, Then you talk about humidity, which in Singapore, humidity, I love walking inside the forest, So the forest has a certain temperature that is, I really enjoy. You sweat and everything. It's like a sauna, like a forever sauna. Yeah. So when you talked about this idea of memory like fire, I kind of like think about the idea of temperature in color, which I didn't talk about in this lecture. I kind of like missed it. But thanks for bringing this up, because in my work, the change of temperature is important. Yeah.
When you were speaking, I remembered this beautiful quote of the crooked timber of humanity, timber as in piece of wood. Of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing will ever be made.
I like the idea of no straight thing will ever be made. Yeah.
From the Gustin, the uncertainty and being able to embrace the fragile ground or shattered ground, as Nick Cave would say, of our soul, as something that we have to, the voice of our shattered ground, speaking of Dylan. Go ahead.
And the voice, the shattered ground, I want to refer back to the Philip Guston painting again, because I think when he was showing you his ugliness, he was being naked. To me, it goes back to the idea of this idea of being transparent and being honest and being confident about it, and to be confident that it can be beautiful. It can be beautiful. Let's give it a shot. Let's give the presence of this image that is naked. Let's give it a shot. And each time it's naked, it's going through different things, of course. With Guston, it's going through different things. I'm not the kind of painter, there is some aspects of nostalgia in my work. Sometimes I start with, and then I shift it from, I go from there, So some people may think that it's quite it has some aspects of sentimentality, and so be it. Yeah.
But I'm sorry I'm going on so much, but I just want to say, I think that this thing of mingling, like voice, like Dylan, voice is a mingling of language and breath, really, right? Our breath. And I think your drawings and paintings are mingling the thought, your thought, with the atmosphere, and your very conscious understanding of how that then enters the world, like it enters and becomes part of the 20-dimensional world we live in. And that voice, meaning the whispering, the quiet voice, embracing the whisper as part of the world, to me, that's becoming increasingly pragmatic, increasingly crucial. And I say pragmatism, meaning I'm a poet, meaning we need the poetic imagination as a pragmatic insurgency against the kind of onslaught of an apocalypse of theatricalities that our world is becoming. In that, I hate to bring up silly, not silly, terrifying stuff like, Meta. Did you hear this announcement yesterday about the new Facebook becoming Meta? And if you read, they're not just changing their name, they're changing their mission. You read some of the paragraphs that that guy is saying of distributed consciousness, what the world is going to become under his leadership of this new venture. It's terrifying. I mean, it's like the Matrix is nostalgic when you really think about what he's talking about in those sentences. My son came running to me like upset, just frightened. So my point is, the nuanced, fragile voice that, you know, I'm saying, we need painters. There's an urgent need. It's like a fireman, you know what I mean? There's an urgent need for painters to come running and keep putting our voices out into the world so we don't get completely flooded in this theatricality mirror play.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, Ian. It's wonderful. I'm going to work on what I learned today.
Any questions from the audience? Ian, the name of our exhibition, as you know, is Sonship, the arc that makes the flood possible. So thank you so much for coming on this ship with us. It was great.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Wonderful. Great.
Okay, thanks,
I look
Ian.
forward to sitting with you sometime with your work, Ian.
Yes, I look forward to traveling to see you.
Yeah.
Both.
Yeah, we love to. Oh my God, to have you at Arts, Letters and Numbers one of these days.
Wonderful. All right. Great to see
Thanks.
you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.